Hello, everybody. I hope you are very well still. I am reading you chapters from my book, Molly Moon's Incredible Book of Hypnotism. Yesterday's was quite short, you may have noticed. Today's chapter is a bit longer. Chapter 20. And today, for you to look at, is this little stuffed patchouli. It was a toy that was sent out with the book when it was first published to try and persuade the shopkeepers to put Molly Moon in their shops and on their bookshelves. And they got a present of one of these, and her hypnotic eyes are perhaps, where's the camera, what persuaded them. So there she is. She's going to sit over there, and I'm going to read you chapter 20. Oh, it's getting quite exciting. November rolled into December, and temperatures in New York dropped as winter sank its teeth into the city. Molly hadn't had time to think about Rocky since, when she wasn't working hard on the show, she was busy enjoying her fame and her fortune. She'd been very busy about town, always with a minder and a bodyguard who kept journalists away from her. Molly had spent happy hours shopping, going to cinemas and seeing the sights. She'd been to an exclusive salon and had her hair cut properly so that she no longer looked like an orphanage kid. And she'd paid 10 visits to a beautician where she'd been steamed and pampered until her skin shone. Although her hands still sweated, they now looked much better after expensive manicures. Her nails were shaped into perfect, polished crescents. Molly loved her new life. She loved the attention that she was getting and the way that people treated her with reverence. She couldn't see now how anyone could live their life any other way. It was so much easier when everybody adored you. And the more Molly lived like this, the more she reckoned that she deserved it. What was more, she began to feel that it wasn't just because she'd hypnotized people that they admired her. She suspected that actually she did have this star quality thing. Everyone at Hardwick House had simply been too uncultured to notice it. After 2 weeks of concentrated rehearsals and hours of practicing, the opening night for Stars on Mars arrived. The pink neon sign on the front of the theatre now read, Stars on Mars, starring Molly Moon and Patchouli the Pug. Behind the scenes, Molly sat in her cluttered dressing room with Patchouli on her lap, feeling very nervous. Both were dressed in silver space jumpsuits. Molly's face was thick with stage makeup so that her face didn't shine under the strong theatre lights. Her eyes were defined with black eyeliner so that they stood out, and her cheeks were sprinkled with glitter. Patchouli had been groomed, and both she and Molly had sparkly powder combed through their hair. Their other costumes, space wetsuits, and their sequined space dance outfits hung on a steel rail. Vases of flowers covered every available surface, sent by everyone who loved Molly. Rixie knocked at the door and popped her face around. Curtains up in 20 minutes, Molly. How do you feel? Fine, Molly lied. Well, good luck. Oh, you don't need it. You're a star, Molly, a sparkling star. Everyone will see it tonight. New York's gonna love you. Thanks, Molly said, her stomach heaving. Rixie disappeared. Oh, crikey, Patchouli, what have I done? Molly moaned. Oh. Now the idea of making her fortune by being in a Broadway musical didn't seem like fun at all. Her nerves were 1,000 times worse than they had been before the talent show in Briarsville. The thought of the audience tonight was truly terrifying. An audience made up of cosmopolitan New Yorkers, hard to please and ready to be dismissive. She knew the audience out there would be skeptical, critical, aggressive, and very, very difficult to excite. But worse than that, difficult to hypnotize. Molly remembered how Davina had been such a challenge to win over. Maybe there'd be well-practiced hypnotism people and hypnotists in the audience, like the sort of professional hypnotherapists who help people give up smoking. Molly tried to pull herself together. What was she thinking of? Of course she'd be much better than them. She only hoped the new scene she had written into the beginning of the show with the new props would make things easier. 15 minutes till curtains up, the tannoy announced. Molly reached into her pocket for her pendulum and stared into its black spiral. "I will do it, I will do it," she said over and over again. And then she kissed the pendulum for luck and put it back in her jumpsuit. Molly and Petula made their way down the corridor and up the stairs to the side of the stage. Through the curtain, Molly could hear the hum of the massive audience. Her hands began to sweat and her heart began to pound. "Good luck, good luck, good luck," she heard people saying. She took her position in the cockpit of a silver spacecraft on the stage, ready for takeoff. 10 minutes to go," someone whispered to her. Molly's stomach writhed. It was difficult to concentrate. The orchestra began to play the overture, little pieces of music from different songs in the musical. The audience went quiet to listen. Molly lowered her head, which felt useless and full of cotton wool. "Come on, Molly, you can do it to yourself," she said to herself in a low, quaky voice. "You can do it, Molly." Then the overture finished, and however hard Molly wished for time to stand still, the show started. With a dash of drums, the curtains swished upwards. The audience sat with bated breath and feasted their eyes on Molly Moon, the cuckoo. At last, there she sat, the new star of the show, in the cockpit of a huge spacecraft, with Petula the pug on the seat beside her. A deep voice crackled over the loudspeaker. "Ground control to Major Wilbur, do you read me? We are ready for liftoff. Over." Major Wilbur, with her eyes shut, replied, "Ready." Then slowly a huge glass window began to lower itself down in front of the rocket. This was the new part of the show which Molly had added, because this glass window was no ordinary glass window. It was an enormous, powerful, magnifying glass that the theatre had ordered especially at great expense from NASA, America's space agency. And as it slowly dropped in front of Molly, it magnified her so much that she became a giant behind it. The centre of the magnifying glass was the strongest part, and when Molly leaned towards this centre, her shut eye became 80 times as big. This looked good, and the murmurs of approval filled the theatre. The New York audience liked this spectacle, and they relaxed to watch the whole stage grow dark, except for a spotlight shining on Molly's eyes, shut as they were. 10, the controller's voice boomed out over the loudspeaker. 9, 8. Engine set, said Major Wilbur. 7, 6, 5, said ground control. We have ignition, said Major Wilbur. 4, 3, 2, 1. And we have liftoff. The roar of rocket engines filled the theatre. Orange lights flashed around the cockpit like fire from the rocket's engine, and then Molly's eyes, as huge as the hugest of TV sets, opened. Molly was composed at last, and her magnified eyes swept over the audience like a laser. From the back of the circle to the back of the stalls, people were washed by Molly's strange, overpowering gaze, and they were sucked into the hypnotic whirlpool of her stare. Molly felt a surge of something like electricity in the air, which made her tingle from head to toe. It was that fusion feeling, but on a massive scale. Molly turned her gaze slowly from left to right. She stretched her gaze to the back of the theatre and then dropped it to the front. And as the fusion feeling became stronger and stronger, Molly's nerves disappeared. She felt hugely powerful. She felt sure that everyone had been hit. And she knew that the theatre doormen were under strict instruction not to let anyone in. She was safe. Just look at me, she said, in case there was anyone out there who hadn't looked up yet. Just look at me, she repeated slowly, her voice like a vocal magnet. Molly had woven her hypnotic instructions into a song which she had composed. She sang it now with no instrumental accompaniment to a plain, haunting tune. You will be bowled over by this show. It'll be so good you won't want to go. My singing and dancing will thrill you to bits. My jokes will give you giggling fits. This blockbuster show was destined to be the star of the 21st century is me. Molly clicked her fingers, and the roar of the rocket launchers filled the air. Yes, said Molly, her whole face now in the centre of the magnifying glass. We have liftoff. The magnifying glass pulled up and away, and the real show began. For 2 hours, the audience was in raptures of pleasure, marvelling at Molly's dancing and singing. She could do ballet, tap dancing, jazz dancing, and break dancing. She leapt effortlessly into the air. She glided, and when she sang, she made her audience go all goosepimply and hair stand out on the back of their necks. She was entrancing. Whereas, in reality, Molly's dancing was clumsy and uncoordinated. Her tap dancing was a mess, and her jazz dancing heavy-footed and out of time. But Molly was having a lovely time dancing, and she got really involved with the Martians' battle scene. Her voice was flat and out of tune, but no one cared. The other actors were great and helped her out whenever she got her lines wrong, although it didn't matter whether she forgot her lines or not. The audience loved her, whatever she did. And they thought Petula was wonderful too, even when she simply lay on the apron of the stage, chewing a stone and looking bored. Ice creams, dripped into people's laps as they forgot to eat them. When the show ended, the theatre erupted with applause, and when Molly came forward to take her bow, the whole audience stood up to cheer and whistle and clap. Flowers were thrown at her. Anything nice that people had on them they threw. Money, watches, jewellery, fancy scarves. It was a show of appreciation that was unlike anything that had ever been seen in New York before. The curtains opened and closed 40 times. The audience clapped and clapped and clapped and clapped and clapped until their hands were red. And then the curtain came down for the last time. Molly felt on top of the world, confident that everyone had seen what she wanted them to see. One person alone slipped through the net. One small boy in the audience had not been hypnotized simply because he had not been watching or listening. He had been reading a comic with a torch and was too absorbed in Superman to look up at Molly's eyes. So later, when he put his comic down, he was the only one who saw Molly's true talent. "Mom, she wasn't that good," he said as he left the theatre. "I mean, we got kids at school who are, better than her." But his mother had been smitten. "Oh, how can you say that, Bobby? She was fabulous, beautiful. And you, Bobby, will remember this night for the rest of your life. Tonight you saw a star being born." Bobby and his mother argued about the show all the way home, and finally she came to the sad conclusion that her son needed either a hearing aid or glasses or a trip to see an analyst. Nachman had avoided the show. He hadn't wanted to risk being inside the theatre in case he was forced to take his anti-hypnotism glasses off. And anyway, for his plan to work, he needed to be outside the stage door when the show ended. It had begun to rain. Nachman stood in his sheepskin coat, hidden in the shadow of a wall a few meters from the stage door. His bald head and greasy mane of hair were splashed with the shower. Raindrops trickled down his neck and off the end of his nose. Just after 10:30, hordes of people began to crowd around the stage door hoping for autographs. 20 minutes later, the doors opened and there stood Molly Moon, smiling and waving with a burly minder on either side of her. The shouts and cheers from the fans were perfectly distracting. Molly's mind was not on Petula. Petula stepped out in the rain and away from the crowd to get a breath of fresh air. She sniffed at a lamppost and had a welcome pee. Then an interesting sheepskin smell hit her nose. She trotted towards a shadowy wall to investigate. And as soon as she'd stepped out of the streetlight, a strong gloved hand picked her up and covered her in a cloth, while another hand clamped around her mouth, shutting it. Petula found herself under the arm of a small, fat, smelly man who was walking briskly away down a side street. She wriggled and struggled, but she couldn't escape his grip. Poor Petula was terrified as she heard, felt, and smelled Molly getting further and further away. Nachman opened the back of his white van and bundled Petula into a cage inside. Before she'd had time to get her bearings, he'd shut the door and the van too. Then he jumped into the front seat, started the engine, and was away. And there you go. That is the end of chapter 20. What is going to happen next? let's see. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and until we next meet, have a happy time and a very happy time hypnotizing people if that's what you're going to get up to. Bye.